But we begin tonight with a visit to the Upside Down, because it is only there that Donald Trump may be able to get away with attempting to lay the blame for the violent state of our politics at the feet of Vice President Kamala Harris and the Democrats. If Merriam-Webster was looking for a new example to help define the term gaslighting, they should look no further than Trump's claim that the latest apparent assassination attempt against him is a direct result of the, quote, highly inflammatory language from the other side. And following that claim, in his next breath, he goes on to use that same inflammatory language against them, saying, quote, these are people that want to destroy our country. It is called the enemy from within. They are the real threat. It's as if Trump believes that we all have a collective case of amnesia from, well, his entire lifetime of using that rhetoric against anyone and everyone who even looks at him the wrong way. As the New York Times' Peter Baker writes, Trump is at the heart of today's eruption of political violence, reminding readers that he has long favored the language of violence in his political discourse, encouraging supporters to beat up hecklers, threatening to shoot looters and undocumented migrants, mocking a near-fatal attack on the husband of the Democratic House Speaker, and suggesting that a general he deemed disloyal be executed. While Trump's running mate J.D. Vance really tried hard yesterday to make his new boss proud by making the case against the other side. We thought, we'd provide the receipts to James David about just who needs to tone down the incitement based on his high standards.
I do think that we should take this opportunity to call for a reduction in the ridiculous and inflammatory political rhetoric coming from too many corners of our politics.
If Comrade Kamala Harris gets 4 more years, you will be living a full-blown banana republic ruled by an anarchy and a tyranny. It's the people that surround her. They're scum. They're scum. And they want to take down our country. They are absolute garbage.
But the big difference between conservatives and liberals is that no one has tried to kill Kamala Harris in the last couple of months.
A Virginia man was arrested on Friday and charged with threatening to kill Vice President Kamala Harris.
Federal authorities have charged a man from Memphis with making death threats against President Biden and Vice President Harris.
We can debate one another, but we cannot tell the American people that one candidate is a fascist, and if he's elected, it is going to be the end of American democracy.
There's a radical left, Marxist, communist, fascist. Comrade is the best because it says he's a Marxist, communist, fascist person, she's a fascist. She's a threat to democracy. If she ever got elected, she'd change it, and it will be the end of our country.
Yes, the sweet smell of receipts. But the height of J.D. Vance's hypocrisy is his inability to take any responsibility for the pain and fear he has subjected his own constituents to. Lies about the town of Springfield, Ohio, and its Haitian immigrant community that have had real and frightening consequences. Today, children, little kids, elementary schoolers, entered school under the watchful eye of Ohio State troopers who are stationed across all 17 buildings of the Springfield School District on the orders of Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. DeWine said Monday that at least 33 bomb threats have been made in Springfield since the lies about the city and Haitian immigrants were pushed by Trump and Vance. DeWine said the threats have been investigated and found to be hoaxes, but that doesn't absolve the people who have amplified, or in their own words, created these stories from what they have foisted upon this town. One Haitian immigrant who has lived in Springfield for 5 years told USA Today that the community feels targeted. Quote, you can see it's pure hatred. They hate us. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is threatening to visit Springfield, Ohio soon. Though today, Springfield's mayor said a Trump visit would put an extreme strain on the town's resources.
We did not have threats 7 days ago. We did not have these concerns 7 days ago. We do today. We'd like those that on the national stage that can bring peace, that could tamper their words and speak truth. That's what Springfield is asking.
Joining me now is David Jolly, former Republican congressman and MSNBC political analyst, and Jason Johnson, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University and an MSNBC political contributor. I'm going to start with David, since you have the disadvantage of not being here with us in the studio. Donald Trump is beyond all of that, and I didn't even include the fact that it is J.D. Vance who called him maybe Hitler. That is J.D. Vance who said that Trump may be Hitler, but that's not even in that little montage. But here's Trump today trying to blame what happened to him in Palm Beach, Florida on, you guessed it, the radical left.
Well, there's a lot of rhetoric going on. A lot of people think that the Democrats, when they talk about threat to democracy and all of this, and it seems that both of these people were radical lefts. Yeah, here's the problem, David. Thomas Crooks, the Butler, Pennsylvania shooter, was a registered Republican. Ryan Wesley Routh from Florida voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and then said he came to regret it. But these are both Republicans. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Joy, this is a week where I think the media has to take responsibility for having some very hard conversations. We understand the sensitivities around the second apparent assassination attempt of Donald Trump, but they don't get to rewrite history or rewrite facts. And you notice both J.D. Vance and Donald Trump use the word rhetoric, violent rhetoric. Rhetoric is language that lacks meaningful content. So when Donald Trump reaches for imagery of calling Vice President Harris communist or Marxist or socialist, or when he tells white rural America they're coming for your way of life, or when J.D. Vance says your side tried to kill our side, that's rhetoric because it's lacking any meaningful content. When the left says Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, he is, factually. Donald Trump incited violence on January 6th to try to overturn an election. We saw that and we heard his words. We saw the people trying to hang Mike Pence. We saw the storming of the Capitol encouraged by Donald Trump. We heard the phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State where he tried to overturn the votes. He has been indicted criminally in federal court under the charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to defraud the U.S. voters, conspiracy to deny rights. Those are actual threats to the democracy. I realize the language sounds harsh, but this is where it's responsible and incumbent on us this week to actually stay true to the facts. Nobody cares how J.D. Vance wants to frame this. He is playing the role of patsy right now for Donald Trump. The only person who wants to hear another word from J.D. Vance is J.D. Vance, because all he is doing is continuing to spread misinformation this week.
Indeed. And Jason, I mean, there is just an also additional fact. It is the right-wing Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, Boogaloo Boys who are actually posing the greatest threat to democracy. That's not me. That's the FBI. The Anti-Defamation League has a report, Murder and Extremism in the U.S. in 2023. All of the extremist-related murders in 2023 were committed by right-wing extremists, not the radical left, the radical right. 88% of killings were tied to white supremacist ideologies. 94% of extremist murders involved a firearm, and it is neo-Nazis who initially started the rumors about Haitians in Ohio. So J.D. Vance might want to look to the people he hangs around with, including blurbing a book called Unhumans and being white nationalist curious for the source of the problems.
This is a campaign strategy. And that's what makes it the most disgusting. The only reason that we're hearing about this now is because Donald Trump believes that the only way he can win this election, and J.D. Vance, who has no soul and no spine, I said he's the Ted Cruz of Ohio. Nobody really likes him. And it's a desperate attempt to rouse up angry white people because that's the only way they can win. And what I think everybody needs to understand, what I think Vice President Harris understands, what I think Tim Walz understands, what I think National Security, FBI, and now the mayor of a small town in Ohio understand, is that these people spark terrorism. There's an entire town in America right now. We're 50 days from an election that's living in fear because of the words that come out of Donald Trump's mouth. There is no excuse for this. There's no explanation for it that can be dressed up. But we shouldn't be shocked because this is a man who is incapable of any level of accountability. Remember, during the debate, he said that January 6th was Nancy Pelosi and the mayor's fault.
Right.
It was Nancy Pelosi's fault that he galvanized hundreds of people to march upon the Capitol and try to hang his vice president. So I'm not surprised by any of this. I think the campaign rhetoric is disgusting. I think it is intentional. I think the most important thing that all Americans can do at this particular point, besides what some of the people in Springfield are doing, which is supporting their local community, is recognizing this rhetoric for what it is and not repeating it, not galvanizing it, not respecting any of the people who sang it, and not pretending that this is part of some policy discussion. They didn't want to talk about policy. They want to talk about hate, and that's what we have to remember.
Let me play Vice President Harris. You mentioned her. This was her comments today about Springfield at the NABJ conference.
There were children, elementary school children, who it was school photo day, who were dressed up in their best, got all ready, knew what they were going to wear the night before, and had to be evacuated. Children. A whole community put in fear. It's a crying shame, literally. What's happening to those families, those children in that community, and spewing lies that are grounded in tropes that are age-old.
David Jolly, you've got young kids. You know, the idea that little kids in Springfield, Ohio can't go to school without armed guards surrounding them is J.D. Vance's fault, and he represents them in the United States Senate. There's an election coming up in which his name will be on the ballot, and he will be being asked to be elevated to the vice presidency of the United States after doing that to children in his own state. And they expect Republicans, particularly white Republicans, to vote for him and in the Senate race against Sherrod Brown. Should we expect better of the voters in Ohio that they will not do that? Right now, Trump is leading in that state. But if they go along with it and vote for him, then what does that say about the Republican voter base?
Yeah, this is a horrific moment for this campaign and for the country, and it was incited by J.D. Vance and Laura Loomer and Donald Trump and others. And I think, you know, I believe it was last week you and I discussed the emerging Willie Horton narrative that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance would lay down.